I sent him a sorry, I was just about to say, on which in fact showing you how much there's a guy in engineering what's his name? Julian. Yeah, Julian Hall.
Welcome everybody. It's a really hot evening, so you're the brave people who have come out despite the warming temperatures. Second time, this is, I think it's a 1 in 50 years event when it happened a week or so ago, and now it's happened twice. To have this level of temperature in June. I'm Tony Booth. I've organised a series of events because I'm standing as Chancellor of Cambridge University, and this is the kind of thing that I do. And the reason I agreed to stand was it gave me an opportunity to campaign on the things that I'm concerned about anyway. Does the university do enough to explore, examine, counter, combat the climate and biodiversity catastrophes that are affecting us in this world, the us that is everybody and all life in this world every day? Well, I've got two great speakers. I just want to say why I asked you two in particular, if you would join us this evening. I think you're two of the most important climate, environmental scientists in the UK. So I think you're two of the most important. But I think you're the two bravest, the two most honest. And that's what we need at this time. We need people who will tell the truth about what's happening to the environment, to the climate, to biodiversity, to the production of waste, both to people but also to themselves, to their colleagues, to the people who run universities and departments, science departments. I wanted the two most truthful scientists that I could think of. And on the left, is Kevin Anderson, Professor of Energy and Climate Change at the University of Manchester, and you can introduce yourself in any other way you want when you come to talk. And sitting next to me, who is going to speak first, Bill McGuire, Emeritus Professor of Geophysical and Climate Hazards at University College London, and author of a very popular and disturbing book to many called Hot House Earth. There are copies available. Bill, you too can introduce yourself in any way you choose, but I don't want to take up more time than I've already done. So, Bill.
Thanks very much, Tony. I'm afraid I'm going to stand over here in the corner because it's going to control the slides. So I do apologise for that. If you can't see some of the graphics in here, I will try and point out the relevant aspects of them. Hopefully you'll get the gist of what I'm going to be talking about. Now, first of all, I want to say a little bit about climate change today, where we're at, where we're headed, and then I'll say a little bit. I'll give a little bit of my thoughts about the university sector, how it's doing, and where it's likely to end up, if anywhere, in coming decades. But there's a lot of information on this graphic. It actually shows the temperature curve from about 20,000 years ago on the left, the height of the last ice age, and then the temperature comes up as the ice melts. It sort of plateaus a little bit, possibly drops, and then today you can see it's shooting up at an alarming rate. And one thing that many people are not aware of is that the temperature has never, ever gone up this high, as quickly. In the entire history of our planet, it's never risen this quickly. There is a period about 55 million years ago, which a lot of people have heard about these days, called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, when the planet was extremely hot for all sorts of geological reasons. Well, temperatures are now going up at least 10 times faster than they did then. So this is unique and unprecedented. It's an experiment, if you like. And there's a few statistics on there you might want to take away. Carbon dioxide levels were 280 parts per million in the atmosphere at the end of the last ice age. They've climbed to 430 parts per million now. That's May this year. Annual emissions in 2024, 41 million tonnes, something like 37 billion from burning fossil fuels. That's the weight of something like 800,000 Titanics, to put it into perspective. The amount of carbon dioxide we've emitted since the Industrial Revolution is somewhere around 2.5 trillion tonnes. Global average temperature rise last year, there are various estimates, all above 1.5 degrees. 1.62 degrees is the estimate of a group called Berkeley Earth in the US. The last 10 years have been the hottest 10 years globally, which is a fairly obvious trend, I think. Quite recently, the World Meteorological Organization, with the UK Met Office, provided a forecast of what temperatures would be doing over the next 5 years or so. And this is the gist of that. 70% chance that the temperature between 2025 and 2029 will exceed 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial. That's the average temperature, the mean temperature. So we're getting to the state where we're pretty much permanently above 1.5 degrees. There's even a small chance of one of these next 4 years being 2 degrees C above pre-industrial. So these are figures that not long ago we were saying we mustn't get past those, we must stay below them. And in fact you will still hear people saying we have to stay below 1.5 degrees, which has been tearing my hair, but it would have been tearing my hair out if I had any left. But it's extraordinary, and we're not effectively 1.5 degrees is dead in the water. 2 degrees maybe isn't yet, but it soon will be. 2 degrees C could be permanently exceeded sometime in the next decade at current emission rates. Global temperatures, just given the emission we've had so far, and the temperature rise we've had so far, global temperatures are set to stay elevated for millennia. This isn't something we can sort out without pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. Temperatures will stay elevated for millennia. If we continue to pump out carbon dioxide at the present rate, then you're looking at something like 500,000 years before temperatures resume to what they would have been in pre-industrial times. We're actually rewinding Earth's climate back about 50 million years or so. As I just mentioned, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at the moment is 430 parts per million. Last year it went up 3.6 parts per million. So the rate of increase is pretty significant at the moment. And it won't take long to get up to 450, 500 or whatever. Now there's something called climate sensitivity, which is how big a temperature rise you get for a doubling of carbon dioxide levels compared to pre-industrial times. So double 280, 560 parts per million. There are various estimates for Earth's climate sensitivity from modelling for various other things. But if we look back at past climates, which is something that I'm more involved with as a geologist, the picture looks especially grim. It looks as if for a doubling of CO2, which we would see later this century, depending upon how quickly emissions continue, in the short term, we would see getting on for a 5 degrees C global average temperature rise. And in the longer term, up to 8 degrees. So that gives you a more accurate picture, possibly, of where we're headed than figures like 1.5 and 2, which we're concerned about at the present time. We're actually going back to a climate that existed about 3 million years ago, the Pliocene. And as soon as the 2030s, we will effectively have a Pliocene climate. But we're not going to stop there, because at the moment, fossil fuel companies are planning to expand, not cut back. We're heading for the sort of climate that we had in Middle Eocene period, which is 50 million years ago. And what is absolutely certain is that we've left effectively the safe space of the Holocene, which is the last 12,000 years or so, over which human civilization developed. We are leaving that safe space for a brand new, innovative climate. You won't be able to see the detail on here, but there's only 2 arrows that are important. It's a graphic that goes all the way back 60 million years. The red is hot, the blue is colder, and I'm just pointing out those 2 geological epochs that I mentioned. The Pliocene we will be returning to in the next decade. The hothouse Earth, really hothouse Earth, in other words, little or no ice left on the planet, we will be embracing in 2140, but these sorts of climates, Eocene climates, will start to emerge in continental interiors as soon as the 2050s. But as I indicated at the bottom there, we're rewinding 2 centuries, 50 million years of global cooling, which is really quite extraordinary, and shows the impact of humanity on the climate and on the planet in general. I always find it amusing when people say, people's excuse for not accepting global heating is that we're too insignificant to have any impact, and that the carbon dioxide levels compared to the rest of the atmosphere are so tiny that they can't possibly make any difference even if we double. And to those people I always suggest, why don't you try a tiny little bit of cyanide in your gin, or a little bit of Novichok nerve agent in your Coke. Being tiny, a tiny amount, has nothing whatsoever to do with the sort of impact it can have. Right, so what's the UK university response to all this catastrophic talk? Well, let's see what they've done. About 4 in 5, which is quite good, have pledged to divest their investment funds from fossil fuels. Some have even banned fossil fuel companies from career fairs. Wow, that's going to change things. A few are even banning their staff from using domestic flights in the UK. They have to get a train instead. So we're really getting somewhere here. The traditional universities like Cambridge are not doing particularly brilliantly. It's the new universities, post-1992, that are really leading the way, such as it goes at the moment. But remember, all this is in response to internal and external pressures. They would have done bugger all if it hadn't been for student protesting, staff protesting, and pressure from outside. So they're being dragged, if you like, into acting on the climate emergency. And there are buts as well, obviously. Only half or so, just over half of universities have excluded fossil fuel extractors in their ethical investment policies. So it is still perfectly possible for them to incorporate gas, oil and coal companies and lend them money effectively. Many of the same universities accept fossil fuel corporation funding for research, scholarships, and various other similar initiatives. Between 2022 and 2023, this totals something over 40 million. I don't have any more recent figures, but I doubt very much if it's greatly less. And the fossil fuel sector, in some degrees, particularly petroleum-related ones, actually sit on advisory boards, on exam boards. They have course input. And finally, many universities, although they won't allow investments in fossil fuel companies, will still invest in banks who are lending huge amounts of money still to fossil fuel corporations. So they haven't done an enormous amount, really. One of the reasons why, I think, is like many fixtures of the establishment, the university sector is living in a fantasy world. This is Chris Stark's quote. He was the head of the Climate Change Committee. He left in 2022, and I was staggered when I heard this. The world that we'll have in 2050 is extremely similar to the one we have now. We'll still be flying, still eating meat, warming our homes, just eating them differently. The lifestyle change that goes with this is not enormous at all. That flies in the face of many recent studies that suggest that all hell will have broken loose by 2050. But the university sector, like many others, this is the way that they're thinking. This is their future. They are getting involved in climate-related measures, but to a very large degree, they are facilitating business as usual. They are seduced particularly by geoengineering, by techniques which reduce the global temperature artificially. Things like marine cloud brightening, which reflects, the clouds reflect light back into space, reflectors in space, absorbing carbon dioxide from the ocean, stratospheric aerosol injectors, which is mimicking an explosive volcano effectively. Now, you will come across quite a few people who, in good faith, support these sorts of measures and say they will buy us time. But at a time when fossil fuel corporations are expanding operations, what the hell is it buying us time for? It's buying us time to pump out more CO2. It is not. These sorts of things are not a solution to climate breakdown and global heating. Something very, very different is needed. But the problem is the university is locked into this fantasy world that everything tomorrow is going to be pretty much the same as today. Now, there's a lot of information on here. I put this together especially for this talk. It roughly goes from today on the left to 2100 on the right. Above the thick line is the world as universities see it, as governments see it, etc. Below are the results of a number of studies that have been undertaken in the last few years. So at the top there you've got 2030 sizable sea operational, HS2 completed 2033, that'd be a laugh, wouldn't it? Heathrow third runway, the late 40s FCC is the Future Circular Collider, it's a Large Hadron Collider replacement. Then you've got UK net zero target, for all that means. Elon Musk, 2050 is 1 million humans on Mars. There we are. 2060 plus AI intelligence overtakes humans. This is the world people are still living in. But look below that line. Potential for societal collapse within a decade. Fairness Foundation, King's College London Report, 2024. 2040, start of societal collapse for business as usual. That's limits the growth, 2022 update. We get up to mid-century. A staggering report from the UK Institute of Actuaries, who are not renowned for their hyperbole. For a 2 degree C temperature rise, 25% fall in global GDP, 2 billion dead. For 3 degrees, 4 billion dead. Similarly, 2050, we're already committed to 20% global income reduction up to mid-century. That's already in the system, if you like. And the Chatham House report 2022, by 2050, because of growing populations, the world will need 50% more food, but crop yields could be down up to 30%. If that's realised, it's a hardening of calories globally. And then 2070 and beyond, again, the Institute of Actuaries, a 50% drop in global GDP. And these are totally different worlds. Which of these worlds is most likely, do you think?
Go about 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Oh, that's very good. I'm nearly done.
Oh, well, that's good.
So, universities need a new mission. I was staggered to find out that the University of Cambridge has a a centre for climate repair. And the hubris is just staggering. That's not what we need. It's not what we need at all in the future. The first thing we need, the first thing that universities should be focusing on is surviving, because if the below the line scenarios are true, then most universities won't be around by mid-century. So it's not a matter of doing something different, they just won't be here. I mean, what sort of business model do you have when there's no money, a huge drop in student numbers and a creaking or failing infrastructure? How do you function? What sort of function should you have? I mean, it may well be that the best case is that universities have no choice but to act as monasteries acted in medieval times. Small hubs of knowledge, expertise and support for communities around them. That's no exaggeration, I think. But whatever's going to happen, what needs to happen now is a sea change in the focus of research and teaching that will offer real solutions, real climate solutions, and help the country and its people to survive. I won't say and thrive, because it's going to be a struggle rather than a matter of thriving. So nobody's going to want in 2050, certainly in my opinion, an industrial chemist or a petroleum engineer or somebody who works on particle physics. That is not going to help. And there are very few institutions, academic institutions in the UK, that do the sorts of things that all universities should be thinking about in the next 10 years or so. There's just a couple of examples that I know of. There's a college in Wales, Black Mountain College, which focuses on learning to live in a warmer world. So it does a BA in Sustainable Futures, it does a lot of NDQs, vocational courses, regenerative farming, agroecology, arboriculture, these sorts of things.
1 minute.
Yeah, okay. Universities like Cambridge might look down their noses at these sorts of things, but these are the sorts of things people will want to know about and need to know. Centre for Alternative Technology is much better known in North Wales. It does master's degrees on sustainability and adaptation, sustainability, food and natural resources, green building, etc. These are what people will need guidance with and training with in decades to come. And that, I think, is where focus should be. And just to conclude, this is a quote from a Nature paper, The Limits to Economic Growth, a couple of years ago. Our academic institutions can be put to good use by helping to define a future world that respects planetary limits, not one that allows business as usual, which is what geoengineering does. Academics have an opportunity to help define an enduring partnership with the planet whose value can be appreciated for millennia to come. Clinging to growth at this point would seem to be a foolish strategy that is destined to fail. And I'll stop there, I must be bang on time.
We'll take a couple of questions now while Kevin is setting up.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a seat?
What role?
My name's Cameron Adams. I'm just interested to know what role you think social science has in universities in terms of investing. It's not just the science, it's also the social
You need to
science.
put your mouth right.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Just wondering what role the social sciences, again, should have in universities in terms of turning this around.
I mean, I didn't mention social sciences because I'm a scientist, I suppose, really, and it's something that passed me by, but it's critical, isn't it? I mean, there's no doubt about it. Social sciences will be a hell of a lot more important than particle physics, as I said, or any of these other things. So I think they'll be that whole area will be coming to the fore, I would have thought, in the next coming decades. But I'm sorry I didn't mention that.
I'll take one more question now and then Kevin will take over.
So I suppose you had a slide on equilibrium climate sensitivity, which to recap is if you double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and allow it to equilibrate, how much warming do you get? And I noticed that your estimates are higher than the IPCC's by quite a bit. And not to be misunderstood, it's very, very concerning, the estimates that the IPCC have. But I was wondering if you're making some comment about the IPCC, and are they trying to comfort us in some way?
Well, I think you can hear me without the mic. The IPCC report...
Take the mic.
Okay. I mean, we all know that they are politicised because countries' representatives have to look very closely, and do look very closely at every sentence. They're consensus-based, and inevitably, because of that, they're conservative. They will never include information, science data that they don't feel is absolutely confirmed as much as it can be. So I read a lot of papers, and I look at what studies have said about climate sensitivity over past geological periods, and they are, on the whole, significantly higher than the IPCC suggests. But I'm not surprised by that, to be honest. It's part of the course, really.
Okay. Kevin, over to you. Okay. Thanks so much. So it's a slightly different tack in that I'm going to look at what we say we're committed to deliver, and then something about what the rate of change is that we need in terms of reducing our emissions, and thereby what that means in terms of how we live our lives, and then eventually what that means for us in terms of universities. So I'm going to finally end up, I've called this here from Rio to Paris, and then on to the UK. The pessimism of the internet. Louder? Just okay, is that better? My brain is swollen. So pessimism of the internet and optimism of the will, which is some people may know as a quote from Gramsci. And I think that really captures where we are today. But I'm going to say something about the role of academia and universities at the end. There is social media accounts that are actually a little bit dormant the last few months, but generally I use them and keep them fairly active. So I'm going to start off by asking what is our key concern over climate change, and it's very easy to think it's about temperature. That's what we often hear about, is it 1.5, is it 2 degrees centigrade? But that's not our key concern, of course. Our key concern is impacts. What are the impacts of climate change? It's not about temperature, it's about impacts. And in fact, it's not even really about impacts. It's about the rate of change of impacts. It's not about 1.5 or 1.2. It's not about the impacts today, it's about the rate of change of impacts. And then asking the question, can we, in our societies, can we evolve fast enough, and can ecosystems and the wider environment evolve fast enough to deal with the changes that we're bringing about? So it's that dynamics of the impacts that really matter. The impacts occur over 1 million years, fine. The impacts occur over 50 years, that can be an utter disaster. So it's the rate of change of impacts. So temperature is just a proxy for that. 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade. We used to think by 2100, but now it's Bill points out we're now talking about in a few years' time for 1.5, and probably middle century, if not earlier, for 2 degrees centigrade. So these data coming earlier. An essential question in all of this is, who is the we that makes these choices? That is really key. It goes back to the point about social sciences and the humanities and ethics and philosophy. These are actually far more important now than climate science. We know what we need to know about climate science. Probably some engineering still out there. I should say I'm an engineer. I used to design and build offshore oil platforms, so my background is actually practical engineering, trying to get blacks out of the ground a long time ago. Someone wanted to drive their cars before we did it. So also, I think I'll also say it's clear, I'll come back to this later anyway, net zero 2050 should not be our concern. I go much further than that and say it's being used, including by universities, as a ruse to hide inaction. And this is the quote from Chris Stark, which I'm also going to use, and captures that really well. And it's severely compromising our Paris and indeed, if you go further back, our Rio commitments. So, that's what is it we've committed to. And I'm going to take it at face value that when our policymakers sign things, particularly for democracies, that they are lying. I generally like to think that our policymakers are lying, make their own judgment, whether that's true or not. So I take them at face value. So back in 1992, and some of the students, they won't remember 1992, but looking at some of you here with either
no hair, grey hair, or dyed hair. Quite a few you can remember 1992. That's when we signed the Rio Earth Summit, and that's when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was first established. And that underpins every single negotiation we've had since then, every COP that we call them, that occurs in November time. And the things that we really signed up to, there's two key elements. There are other elements in there as well. The first one is to avoid, forget the fancy language, it's basically to avoid dangerous levels of climate change. Who defines dangerous? Who's the we that defines dangerous? And the second one is that we will reduce our emissions, so every country signed up to reduce their emissions, on the basis of fairness. And this has been very well established at the UNFCCC back in Rio in 1992 and every COP since. And the rather challenging title of Common but Differentiated Responsibility and Respective Capabilities. And to cut through the nonsense, it basically means cut emissions fairly, and rich countries like the UK should take the lead. We sign up to that every year, and again, I assume our policymakers are not lying. That was 1992. It took us 23 years before we actually quantified what do we mean by dangerous. And it came out of the Paris Agreement, and it came out as a temperature. We want to hold well below 2 degrees centigrade. Remember, it doesn't say there a reasonable chance of. Hold well below, which is like 100% chance of. And ideally, we want to pursue 1.5. And that was driven very significantly by some of the poorer countries, particularly in the global south, that had their voices at last heard, but pretty much ignored, because notice the language around it was about pursue 1.5, so it was still very weak language there, but at least we heard at last some of the voices in the global south. We also wanted to be guided by science and to reduce our emissions on the basis of equity. That's what we signed up to, and I think it's absolutely key that we remember that. So, since Paris, the concern has risen that the 2 degree C framework that we had isn't actually an appropriate framing for dangerous climate change. A lot of work has gone in to understand what the impacts between 1.5 and 2 degrees C look like, and 1.5 looks damn sight more damaging than we thought before. So in a sense, 1.5 is a new 2 degrees centigrade. So we need to really be staying no more than 1.5, because that fits well with what we signed up to do, to reduce emissions to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And there's lots of evidence now that 1.5 is exactly that. So I'll come back to Bill's comment that it's probably not achievable. I'm in that camp, unfortunately. But nevertheless, it's what we signed up to, and that's what I assume our policymakers are trying to deliver. So, on impact, 1.5 should be centigrade. So, once we've got the framework that we've signed up to, particularly, well, all countries, pretty much all countries have signed up, the States at the moment, back on that, pretty much every country signed up. What can science, what can the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tell us about how fast we need to make changes? Now, the latest report from the IPCC, you can't see very well there, came out at about 2020, 2021, depending which part of the report you're looking at. And it produces things like this. Don't worry too much about the numbers. You probably can't see them anyway from where you are. But on the left-hand side, you can look at 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming, or 2 degrees centigrade, and you can choose whatever temperature you want. And the IPCC, through the science that they've embedded in their reports, from 2020, that's important to note, from 2020, tell us how much carbon dioxide we can dump in the atmosphere if we want to stay with a certain probability below 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade. And that basically tells us how many tons of fossil fuels can we use. Because most of the emissions we put in the atmosphere are from fossil fuels, and it's also really important in relation to agriculture as well. I'm not going to be talking about that tonight. It's a very important part of the picture. Probably 25% or so of the warming we see comes from agriculture, from how we feed ourselves, from land use. The majority, still 75%, 70-75%, comes from our use of fossil fuels. So this tells us how many tons of fossil fuels we can use if we want to abide by the commitments that we make. And the numbers there are, these probably don't mean much to you, but I'll come back to this a little later. The IPCC and the last report said for 50-50 chance of 1.5, would you get a plane with a 50-50 chance of landing safely? All planes land, but landing safely, would you take that? Would you put your grandchildren on a plane with a 50-50 chance? So 50-50 chance, we can dump about 500 billion tonnes of CO2 in the atmosphere. And for 2 degree C framing of the Paris Agreement, we can always double that, about 9. That's the number that came out of the IPCC there. But that was a long time ago. You know, that's 5 years ago. And most of it was based on work that was prior to 2020 anyway. So if we update the budgets now with the latest science in the various papers that are out there, I choose the work of Robert Lambert and his colleagues. I think he shows the greatest level of, I would say, scientific integrity. There's other assessments out there, and I think that they have, for whatever reasons, I think they're probably been overly optimistic in some of their assessments. So I'll take Robert Lambert's view, my framing of what we need to do about climate change. So we can then start to say, you know, the budgets for 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade, they're the remaining global budgets at the start of this year. Remember, we emit about 40 billion tonnes a year. We're now halfway through the year, so this year we've already emitted about 20 billion tonnes. So we can reduce those numbers by 20 billion already. We then say 40 billion tonnes, that tells you how many years of current emissions we can have to stay below 50-50 chance of 1.5, or a better chance, an 80% chance of staying below 2 degrees centigrade. 4 to 14 years of current emissions. Remember, emissions are still going up. Almost certainly they will go up again this year. That's a reduction rate globally of about 19 to 20% every single year for 1.5. Globally, 19 to 20%. For 2 degrees centigrade, it's a reduction of about 7% every single year. Again, globally, just do a simple bit of maths for that. And if you were to draw a straight line to 0, 1.5 is 0 by about 2032-ish, and 2 degrees centigrade by about 2050. If you just draw a straight line from now, remember emissions are still going up, so they're not going up. And we're using up the budget about 2% every month. 2% every single month. So at the time we've been organising this talk and so forth, we've probably gone through about 6, 7, 8% of the budget for 2, and even quite a significant chunk, about 0.6% for 2 degrees centigrade. If you look at those numbers there, I come to the conclusion, shared by Bill, and in fact shared by most academics I know, if the microphones are removed from them, that we can't hold to 1.5. It is now no longer possible. The Met Office report earlier this year said we need 20% reductions every single year globally to stay at 1.5. 20%, just think what that means globally. Now we also have signed up, and again I hold us to account, because we've signed up to reduce our emissions on the basis of equity. No government is taking this seriously, surprising. Using the language of Paris, I don't think it's a particularly great language. They use the language of developed countries and developing countries. And then the emission reductions for developed countries should be faster than those of developing countries. So you can split the budgets amongst those. So if you look at developed countries, and this is based on some work I published with colleagues in 2021, where we looked at what would this actually mean if you took the budget and split it in line with our commitments in Paris on equity. Look then at developed countries, and you can ask the question, how much do you can get? You can sort of divide it down how much Cambridge get, or how much even individuals. But every time you divide the pie, the level of uncertainty goes up. There are lots more assumptions in there. But we've taken it down to the level of the UK. We've done this work for sectors, for different countries and so forth, and different regions. If you start looking at the UK note values, so we have about 2.5 billion tonnes that we can emit from the UK. That sounds quite a lot, except for we emit about almost 400 million tonnes a year, so 0.4 billion. So about 7 years, I should say, approximately 7 years of current emissions for 2 degrees centigrade. And if you see it for 1.5 now, so grayed out, it's about 2 years. That's why I don't think that 1.5 is in no way impossible. And I say that with a very heavy heart, because that means we have deliberately chosen to sacrifice typically poor people in the global south and typically people of colour. And we've known that colonial law has been completely embedded in our climate change discussions, in the way that we've done our work in our universities. So I think there are some real serious issues to be asked about how colonial and racist we still are embedded in our laws. The reduction rate for the UK needs to be about 14% per annum, 14%. And when people say the UK has done really well, it's at a 50% reduction since 1990. If you include aviation shipping and our imports and exports, it's near a 20%. That's about 0.6% reduction every single year. 0.6. At most, it's 1% every year. We need 14% every year for 2 degrees centigrade, which anyway is very dangerous. And if you were to draw a line to zero emissions for the UK, it's zero by about 2038, not sort of 2050 net zero emissions. But isn't the UK showing leadership? This is that point I made before. The UK is the first major economy to have hardest emissions. But it's just convenient accountancy that allows us to make these statements. So it's those numbers there exclude international aviation and shipping. The Committee on Climate Change now are including those to their significant credit. But if you look at it overall, we're not showing any real leadership, nor is Denmark, nor is France, nor is Sweden. There are no progressive countries in the global north, which is quite a damning statement to make. Not on climate change, some might argue on anything. And I think colonialism is deeply at play here. In the last COP, some of you might remember, the UK had this grand announcement of 81% reduction in its emissions compared with 1990 by 2035. That reduction excluded aviation and shipping emissions. If you include them, it's about 78% reduction. That's quite a big difference. The 81% was not a new target. It was part of the old balanced net zero target. It was already there. It was resold, repackaged as, oh, look how wonderful we're doing. The government claimed, which is utter nonsense, and the Committee on Climate Change claimed this, that this 81% reduction is in line with the UK making its fair contribution to not exceeding 1.5. Well, perhaps if we like the colonial view of the world, which I think quite a lot of senior academics and government advisors do, then perhaps they think it's okay. But that's the UK getting 3 times more per person for the UK than the global average. Do we think that's neighbourhood? Why should the UK get 3 times more per person? We signed up to say we would reduce emissions faster than the poor countries. Surely the poor people should have more per person than we should. Oh no, because we're British, we think we should get 3 times more. It's just a bit of maths. So I'm going to just talk briefly on net zero. I'm not going to go into any detail here. Basically, net zero 2050 is just an accountancy scam. It allows you to do all sorts of weird things with the numbers. You've got a spreadsheet. You can muck around comparing methane, CO2, you can pretend to reduce emissions in remove emissions from the atmosphere in 2050, and that means we don't have to remove them so much today, so you can carry on with aviation or road expansion. So there's a whole lot of sort of scams that are embedded in net zero 2050. And in fact, if you look at the detailed analysis and see from the Committee on Climate Change in a spreadsheet, you can see those scams going on there. It's deeply colonial. In the UK one, in developing the budget, dividing the budget between developed and developing countries, as I said before, it's hugely reliant on hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 being sucked out of the atmosphere by our children and our grandchildren, not us, of course. We're just playing with the idea, but our grandchildren and our children are going to have to suck our CO2 out of the atmosphere so we can expand Luton Airport, Gatwick, Heathrow, drive big cars, and all the other things we love doing. It neglects the huge imbalance of responsibility within our countries. So there's a huge imbalance. But most professors I know have very, very high carbon footprints, which is one of the reasons they don't want to really address this, how serious the issue is. So there are huge imbalances between the poor and the wealthy in our society. Net zero, effectively, it's embedded in all of the IPCC scenarios without exception, and the UK's balanced net zero pathway. It's a big scam, but once everyone's involved with it, it's easy just to believe it. And it's embedded in, of course, all the funding regimes. It's also seen by some people, its strength is that everyone can sign up to it. My view is that's a weakness. All of those are signed up to it.
Yeah.
And not one of those is thinking to stop its production of fossil fuels. They're all looking for more fossil fuels. All that group of charlatans have also signed up for net zero 2050, but they're all looking for more oil and gas. Even in the UK, is still convincing some of that to go ahead. So I'm involved in a court case with the development of a new, not an extended field in Lincolnshire at the moment. So they're all in net zero. But if you listen, contrast that with the Secretary General of the United Nations, when he said that today fossil fuel producers and their neighbours are still racing to expand production, though full well his business model is inconsistent with human survival. He stands up on quite a few issues. I'm quite surprised that he's still there. He seems to have quite a lot of integrity. This is an economist, a French economist, who was a contemporary of Adam Smith and actually had quite right-wing views. I'd say further than Adam Smith. I quite like Adam Smith's writing, if you actually read what he wrote. I interpreted. But I love this quote from Frederick Bastiat. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men or women in a society, over the course of time they create for themselves a legal system that authorises it, next year 2050, and a moral code that glorifies it. And that's exactly what we've done here, but I think it's an interesting or an important addition to add to that. And an academia that justifies it, that's the goal of academia, is to justify the bigotry that's embedded in our targets. That's how the funding regimes are there for, and then speak out, and choose not to speak out, and a media that disseminates it. So capture is full. And I'll go back to the quote from Chris Starr, the committee on the CEO of the Committee on Climate Change, just before he left. If you're a person going about your day-to-day life in Britain right now, I don't think your day-to-day life will be that different in 2050 when we hit net zero. You're still driving a car, blah, 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 it should be fine, whatever else. It's not frightening, you can still fly from Hong each year, you can still have a state if you want to. There's no huge shift here for 1.5, 20% per annum reductions globally. We all know that's not true, and I couldn't find any other academics that spoke out against it. Not one in public. Take the microphone away and they'll tell you how bad it is. Put the microphone in front of them, they'll spin some lovely yarn if they're looking to get an MBE or be knighted or get some funding grants. The seventh carbon budget report from the Committee on Climate Change, the last one that we actually have. The Committee on Climate Change advised the government is still seeing lots of fossil fuels being emitted. 30 million tonnes of CO2 being emitted in 2050 from burning fossil fuels. That's more fossil fuels per person in the UK in 2050 than the average Kenyan emits today. How on earth can that be in line with 1.5? By negative emissions and colonialism, basically. And the view is that the UK should get 3 times the global average. Colonialism is alive and thriving, and it's deeply embedded in our economy. So my headline conclusions: for the UK, 50% chance of 1.5 requires cuts well over 20% now. I don't think that is anyway possible. It also requires big cuts in the non-CO2 greenhouse gases. And they're going to be worse. We're looking for things like liquefied natural gas, blue hydrogen, all these other things, all these sort of, again, a whole suite of other scams to keep the fossil fuel industry going, all of which embed lots more non-CO2 emissions, non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think 1.5 is any longer possible, and I say that, as I said, with a very heavy heart. And for well below 2 degrees centigrade, we require, for somewhere like the UK, cuts of 14% per annum, globally about 7% per annum. There's no sign of this occurring at all at the moment. Current pledges, promises that we make, mean that by the early 2030s, the 2-degree sea framing will be where the 1.5 is now. In other words, not possible. I think it's really important to bear in mind. That tells us the time frame where action is important. It's not after 2030, it's between now, this evening, and 2030. That's the time frame that's important. And that's what I'll put on there. It's not delivering its cuts now, not in 2050. So, what about our world-walking universities? There's a number of universities. One of them there's Cambridge, you can see. So, I'm going to argue there should be 5 key criteria, I think, for being a good academic, an honest academic. I mean, if you want to become a consultant, be a consultant. If you want to become a journalist, be a journalist. Academics have a particular role in society. And the first one is integrity. Abide by a consistent and transparent set of principles. Stand up for what we believe in and let other people see what it is that we have as our underlying set of principles. Do not spin a conclusion. Do not overplay a conclusion. Do not underplay a conclusion. Just speak that conclusion honestly in a language we can understand. Courage, be clear and logical consistency in our reasoning so others, people can follow through our arguments. And I would also there say it's really important that we write things in a language that other people can understand. So if we publish some paper that disappears in a journal, we should also provide some sort of more sort of accessible social media output or some other thing that people can access and read and understand. Stand by our conclusions and support our colleagues to stand by theirs. Even if we disagree with their conclusions, we should support them to say what they think. And have humility. We all get things wrong from time to time, and we have to accept that and change our positions accordingly. if you're getting things wrong regularly as an academic, then you've done the job. We will get things wrong. Cherish our independence. Disregard the sensibilities of paymasters. I don't care a dot about what people who pay me are interested in. I only care about the analysis of individuals. Ignore the interests of our supervisors unless they directly relate to the research, and the vice-chancellors and ephemeral politics. These are not concerns for us as academics. You know, our job is to do our work and communicate our results clearly and directly. Be prepared to counter established views, however powerful they may be, and support our colleagues who also are prepared to stand up and counter views. Even again, if we disagree with their conclusions, we should support them to do that. Be disinterested in whether our views make us popular or liked. It's not a beauty contest. We're not there to be liked, we're there to provide society with information for society to make those decisions. Recast our findings in accessible language. That does not mean dumbing down. If we can't explain our work in a language that most people can understand, it means we do not understand our analysis ourselves. We just find this that quantum mechanics that you spot on there. So I think we should be able to always do that. Guard against the allure of prestige. Look at how many climate academics have got some gold or the other, some award, some knighthood, OBE, MBE. You know, we love being invited along to ministerial briefings to talk to CEOs of companies, to have meeting interviews. We have to be really careful about prestige. The allure of prestige undermines our independence a lot of the time. And we all fall for it. I fall for it. All my academic colleagues fall for it as well. But we have to help each other to guard against that allure of prestige. What role for universities in climate change? And be clear whether our operations are aligned with Paris or not. Don't hide behind net zero. Give serious consideration to the implications of being Paris aligned. And this means a radical rethink of what actually universities do when they are. And things like internationalisation. We bring all these students from all over the world. We think it's wonderful. We pretend it's some cultural exchange. We start to money really. Anyway, we pretend it's that. Of course, they fly over here. They fly home at the end of the term. And they fall a semester. Then they fly back again. And all of those missions are embedded in the norms of how we teach in universities. Why not have our academics go across to those countries rather than having them all coming here? You know, rather than 300 students coming here, one academic can go there. Why not do it virtually? So there's a whole lot of things there. Fieldwork. Why do we think a rich white academic must go to the poor part of the world to carry out fieldwork? Can't they do the fieldwork? Can't the poor people do the fieldwork? Can't we provide them the equipment, the wherewithal, so they can do the work, so we engage with them? Same for film crews with the media. Why do we think a white camera person has to go report on something that happens in Bangladesh? Can't they operate cameras? But we do this all. So a whole set of things have to be opened up here. Reviews of salaries. Salaries relate very much to our missions. Look how many academics have second homes. And travel, flying, all those other things. And you consider... Oh, is that 3 minutes? I know, it was almost at the end. Consider the diaspora of our universities. So there's a huge number of people in our universities who, they may well be born in the UK, but their families will be in other parts of the world. And many of them are actually in some of the really vulnerable parts of the world. So if a university really cares about its own staff and its students, it should be thinking about the people elsewhere in the world who are directly related to people working with these universities. So the diaspora issue, I think, is hugely important. I mean, we should care for them anyway, care for other parts of them anyway. None of this is easy. It begs profound shifts in every single aspect of how we run universities. Every single element. I can't think of one that doesn't need some radical shift if we are serious in terms of the operation of universities and our values to be anywhere near Paris aligned or aligned with the principles of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You can choose your metaphor: Manhattan Project, the Apollo Project, the Marshall Style plan after the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. It's something fundamental. It's not a tweak to business as usual. All the things that we academics love, which are just incremental adjustments. We had that opportunity in 1990 and 2000. It's 2025 now. We've blown everybody's carbon budget there is. Emissions are still going up. And we're still playing a game as if we're in 1990. We're not in 1990. So we have to think about where we are today. This is a quote, I've started using it again just recently, from Robert Unger, who's Brazilian, he wasn't a politician but a philosopher. I think it's just spot on. At every level, the greatest obstacle to transforming the world is without the clarity and imagination to conceive that it could be different. At the time that photograph was taken, most people didn't think things would be radically different, but clearly we've changed. So we have to have that opportunity to think differently. That's the role of universities, to have clarity and imagination, and to start to sketch out what would a Paris-aligned future look like. And to come back to the quote from Gramsci, because I think, however I play this, from the numbers, I'm deeply pessimistic. I think we're heading to hell in a handcart. There's nothing to suggest from numerically at the moment that that's going to do anything differently. So from that side, it's deeply depressing. But Gramsci was really important, that idea of the optimism of the will. We haven't yet forgotten any chance of improving things. So I think there's something about that idea of the optimism of the will, that we can stand up to challenge the norms, to change the way that we do things. And that's, to some extent, what Tony's involved in here at the university. How can Cambridge University, how can academia do something very, very different? My view at the moment on climate change, not so much on the science, but what we should do about it, universities have been deeply embedded as part of the problem. They are not part of the solution at the moment. They are deeply part of the problem. There's little good bits here and there, but overall, in relation to reducing emissions, they're like the Exxon of reducing emissions, which is quite a challenging statement to make, but I would hold that. So on that note, thank you.
Would you mind coming out as well for your question?
Hi, I'm Dr. Anthony.
Just hold on a second. Okay. There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Introduce yourself and then.
Yes, of course. I'm Dr. Anthony, and I'm a resident of Cambridge for the past 45 years. First of all, of course, please, anyone who's eligible to vote for Tony, please do. We do need someone like yourself to be a chancellor at Cambridge University. My question would be, what can, as a resident, we do to help you achieve what you want to do? How can we help?
You talk to me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Obviously.
Well,
I'm assuming you're supporting these movements, so that's what I'm saying. What can we do as the Cambridge residents to help you?
First of all, I want to thank both Bill and Kevin for their great talks. I think they were incredibly difficult and wonderfully honest. And there is no optimism of the intellect or the will without facing reality. There is no hope unless we look reality starkly and grasp what is happening, and I think that's what's presented here tonight. In terms of what people can do, they can follow up what our speakers have said. We have to demand that people tell the truth. We have to tell each other truths, like the legally mandated carbon budget for the Cambridge and Peterborough region has 2 years left to 2050. That's the reality, and nobody mentions it. Instead, they talk about how we're going to double the size of the city, we're going to pour high emissions concrete across transport corridors, linking into the city and so on. We have to start or vocally demanding the truth. If, as may happen, an ex-CEO of British Petroleum becomes the next Chancellor of this university, we have to protest. We'll do what we can, as we all do. I know, looking around this room, there's a great network here. People work a lot harder than I do, but we're a network of people who care about this city, who actually care deeply about the university. We want it to be a place that focuses on integrity, honesty, fairness. We don't want it to be a place that is focusing on grabbing funds that undermine its own integrity because they will keep a few research centres going for another few years. So with me, whether I get elected, and its chances are small, or not, we will continue as activists to demand the kinds of things of this university that any population should expect of people who in the university are part of our city. Thank you. Yeah. Now, can we have some questions? Don't involve me in Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria. I am a doctor living in Cambridge, just outside. I just have two questions, really. First of all, as a sort of scientist, I'm always really interested in how data is captured and presented. So this is a question for the two speakers. So I just wanted to try and understand, because one thing that I'm learning is that the world is just like veiled in obscurity, and especially sort of anything to do with climate change as well. So my question is, so if Nestle needs water, fossil fuels, energy, etc., to produce like water bottles, does that come under Nestle headquarters as in Switzerland producing all that climate change, or does that come under Saudi Arabia, China, because they're providing raw materials? Because I think this relates to the colonial something that you were talking about. And so that was the first question. The other question was to do with blind spots, again, veiled in obscurity. So I think there are certain industries like the military especially, but also like AI and cryptocurrency and healthcare to an extent, space technology, that I think are kind of lagging behind in how they present or they talk about their climate change. So I just wanted to ask about what universities, not what they can do, but I feel like they obviously produce a lot of the output to progress those fields, but is there something to do in them declaring the accountability in terms of climate change within these industries? It's just something I'm not aware of.
Yeah, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Junaid. So first, can I ask two questions, actually, one for each of you. Brian, I'm just intrigued as a former UCL student myself. If you could very briefly talk about...
you mean Bill?
Bill, sorry.
It's okay.
Long day. If you talk about what the UCL has been doing in terms of the climate, because when I was looking through different prospective universities, one of the things that did draw me to UCL was their what seemed to be quite an impressive policies that they boasted about. Of course, we've seen recently there's been a student-led movement demanding fossil-free careers, and we could discuss how successful that has been. And we've also seen the UCL's continues to invest in Barclays despite a strong opposition from both pro-Palestine activism and anti-climate change activism. And Kevin, first of all, thank you for bringing in the decolonial narrative and bringing that into centre stage into this climate change discussion. And continuing in that frame of mind, I wonder if we could talk about the impacts of the ongoing Holocaust in Gaza when it comes to the climate change, because we can see the amount of like F-35 jets that have been flown all the way over there. Like, it just assumed like the amount of fossil fuels needed to kill like one person, like surely dwarfs anything that any one of us in this room can produce in that entire year.
Okay. So, who wants to go first?
I'll say something about UCL. I'm a little bit out of the loop at UCL because I am emeritus, which effectively means I've retired, and I haven't really. But, I mean, UCL has done a few things, mostly under pressure from the students, and generally it's pretty small beer. I mean, I know that they're still being awarded grants for looking at things like carbon capture and storage, and other methodologies for allowing continuous business as usual. Obviously they've opened, or in the process of opening a massive new campus. So if we can look at their emissions, there's no way that they're keeping those under control. I was actually an undergraduate there. There were 8,000 students. Now we're talking 60, 70,000. And a lot of universities, UCL being one of them, are just desperate to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bring in more and more foreign students and make more money and get more research grants. That is not compatible with the way the world's going, I don't think. So, yeah, they've tinkered around the edges a bit, but that's about it.
But trying to remember all the questions that get to my age is a bit tricky. The first one on sort of Nestle, I don't know about Nestle or any other particular company, because they may have some sort of in-house accounting that takes into consideration that a lot of their emissions are related to what happened elsewhere in the world. But in terms of our national accounting, within which Nestle will be part of that, we do not include what are called consumption-based emissions. So we're only too happy to blame the Chinese for their high level of emissions whilst we use their Apple laptops and phones. Consumption-based emissions are really important. They're much less reliable and robust in terms of data than our actual emissions directly. Nevertheless, they should be a very important guide to what it is we're doing in our society. So one of the reasons the UK looks to have done well with its emissions is that we basically closed down much of our manufacturing. And that means we offshore the emissions to someone else that we can criticise them. Some companies might take that into account, but at the national level, typically, most nations do not take into account consumption-based emissions. You also touched on the military, which in fact I think the second question did as well. There are these sectors out there who have very high emissions, and some of the new sectors like AI, well, have really got high emissions, but they're rocketing. And the belief of a lot of those is that the ruse, it's not as strong even a belief, it's not certainly not a conclusion, is that somehow we'll find some technical wizardry that allows them to carry on business as usual and emit a lot in the near term. And so somewhere in the future we'll find some way to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere or reflect sunlight into space or something. So that their business model is reliant on these highly speculative, potentially very dangerous alternatives. So they lock in business as usual. And it's clearly the military is one of these that doesn't seem to take a great deal of concern about its carbon footprint. I would go further though and say that there are plenty of climate reasons for not doing what's going on in Gaza, but I think there are one or two other sort of humanitarian reasons why what they're doing is a disgrace in my mind. I'm not a great fan of ethnic cleansing in the past. I'm not a great fan of ethnic cleansing in the present either.
Thank you. Well, we've got quite a number of questions.
I'll go to this side.
Hi, I'm Hugh Hunt from the Centre for Climate Repair here at Cambridge University. This week there's the Tipping Points Conference in Exeter, led by Tim Lenton. He's just recently written that the West Antarctic ice sheet is likely past its point of no return. Greenland ice loss is accelerating. Permafrost regions are tipping. coral reef systems are undergoing irreversible mortality, and the AMOC, Atlantic Ocean circulation, is weakening. It is, as you say, kind of pretty grim. And maybe you're going to ride your bike to this tipping point conference tomorrow, but what would you say to the tipping points conference if you were there about these things, what we might do about it? It seems that the emissions reductions is not going to be sufficient, and that these changes are baked in as we speak. So what are we going to do?
Anthony Carpen, local historian. One of the things that Cambridge University in particular, but also other universities, seem to have cut back on are lifelong learning opportunities and community education. If we look at the local newspapers of the past, Cambridge University and also Anglo-Ruskin University used to have quite extensive courses and workshops that ordinary people living in the city could take part in, and they don't have them now, or if they do, they are far away and magically hauled, and we have to pay something like £3,000 for the course. So my question is, what role is there for the universities to, if I can put it this way, get out of the ivory towers and get back into communities to provide the spaces and the places to have those conversations, and for audiences not familiar with the presentations that you gave, to learn about how serious it is, and talking about a serious response. For me, it doesn't feel like governments and our government is recognising the crisis that it is. The nearest comparison I can think of is in World War II and the Norway debate, which resulted ultimately in Churchill having to hire or bring in his biggest rival, Bevin, to effectively run the economy in World War II and direct what should and should not be produced. And at the moment, I don't see anything like that happening. Thank you.
Good question.
Okay, I think sometimes we'll answer those couple. Then, yep, okay.
About the tipping point question, I'd turn it around really and say, what is the point in a scheme to, in inverted commas, repair the climate when we're still pumping out carbon dioxide in huge quantities? There seems to be this naive idea that if we for some reason embrace geoengineering, the fossil fuel corporation will say, okay, we'll stop pumping out the carbon now. Governments will come on board, they'll say we must get emissions down very quickly. But that's not going to happen, is it? I mean, I've used this analogy before, but geoengineering at a time when we're pumping out 40 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide a year is like giving a poisoned patient an antidote while still pumping him full of poison. It doesn't make any sense at all. And I find it difficult to understand how this can work. I mean, okay, if we brought emissions down and we then wanted to try and take carbon out of the atmosphere, fine. But at the same time, how does that make sense?
You and I have discussed this at length for many years, actually. And I take probably a slightly different, only it's a slightly nuanced different view to Bill on this. As you say, tipping points look appalling. Even if you ignore the tipping points, just looking at our emissions, they look appalling. So I do think we have to, as academics, I think it's appropriate to have some level of funding, not a lot, some level of funding, to look at some of the sorts of things that you and others are engaged with. But there's a huge but on this. The first thing I expect any academic working in those areas to do is always to bang on about emissions and to ensure every single event that is run in line with Paris sort of commitments, UNFCCC. So no international conferences that require anyone to fly there or to shovel a long way. So all of the things that are deeply embedded in the geoengineering arena, the tipping point arena, all these other ones that just at the moment are part of the problem because they just do the same thing. They run their and institutions in the same way, those have to fundamentally change. And every single member has to vociferously talk about that before the geoengineering. So I think if we could reframe that, I think it is appropriate to spend some proportion of the money. But of course, if you look at where the research money is going, there's almost no research money from any of the research councils going on radical change in line with our Paris commitments. It's all linked to net zero nonsense. And net zero nonsense is in some degree supported, or at least it seems to be supported, by things like climate repair. Because there's a belief or a convenient excuse that don't worry, we can solve this. So if you look at the Committee on Climate Change's spreadsheets, they still have huge amounts of emissions in the future. They're completely at odds with our climate commitments, and yet they continue to tell you they're not. I expect every geoengineer to come out and say those commitments are not in line with the science. So I think there's a role there for vociferous opposition to the lies and nonsense that we hear from policymakers, journalists, and indeed sometimes our own colleagues, as well as some research to be undertaken to look at these issues.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned our own colleagues, because I think it is the duty of all academics to call out those aspects of the university which are working against the rapid reduction in emissions. I went to an event the other day, which was the sustainability showcase. Lovely things across the university and in the colleges that they were doing, but there was no level of criticism. This is the Cambridge University is a university. It should be trumpeting critical engagement with each other. Where is the criticism of the centres popping up to perform greenwashing duties? The Centre for Carbon Credits, for example. Yeah. And then there's Anthony Carpen's question. Does somebody want to answer it here? Or perhaps you would say something first, because you want to talk about University of the Third Age very briefly, which is an opportunity going on in Cambridge, and then we'll come back to you. I can come to you, or do you want to come to me? It looks fine. Okay. Say who you are, Kay.
I'm Kay Hardcastle, and among other things, I'm a member of the University of the Third Age in Cambridge, which is an embracing and open-minded organisation dedicated to educating all its members. And as it happens, our open day is tomorrow between 10 and 1. So if anybody is of retirement age...
You don't have to be retirement age, just got in full-time employment.
Not in full-time employment. Then the open day is tomorrow between 10 and 1, coincidentally. We have a course, Climate Change, What to Think and What to Do. And 5 of us, survivors of that course, 4 from villages and 1 from town, formed a pod to discover what sort of climate action each person would feel comfortable doing in their community. And we discovered that everybody was doing something different. So now we meet monthly in Waterstones to exchange ideas and to say what we're going to do and to encourage each other and so on. It's very, very constructive, so that everybody in this little pod goes back to their community and learns to participate in some kind of ecological climate action. I can't see very well in this light. The light isn't very good. And now then, in this little pod, thank you. Yes, thank you. We alpha tested Semantic Climate, which is a software program created to convert the IPCC reports the IPCC reports are actually in PDF form, which means like tombstones etched in stone. This semantic climate software converts it into HTML, which means that the IPCC reports are more understandable to more people, ordinary people. And we used our U3A course material to alpha test this program.
Can you sort of wrap up?
Yes. We have a sustainability reading group, and our movie makers have made 2 films. One about climate anxiety, made with a local community college, and called Anxiety to Action, first shown at the Cambridge Festival. And another, Bats, Bottles and Butterflies, shows environmental activism by younger children. And they're very, very moving. You have on your chairs links to both of them, which are now on YouTube, so that you can go and find them and see them for yourselves. There's also a link on your chairs to a longer film, which is called Lab Coats to Handcuffs. It's a professionally made film about climate scientists who had to take extreme action because governments were ignoring and dismissing their scientific knowledge.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
One thing to show you. Does everybody know about the University of Cambridge Civic Engagement Survey?
Yes.
Everybody in Cambridge can take part in this. You can find it online, and it is anonymous. Or you can find paper copies at the public library and all the places where you can find it.
Thanks, Kay.
Just on the education one, yeah. I think your point's really well made. We absolutely need to escape out of our ivory towers, but far more than that, governments need to go back. We used to have really good adult education systems in the UK. We also still hugely undervalue FE. I left school at 16. I did my apprenticeship, worked on ships all around the world and the engines of ships. And I think all of that sort of way of looking at the world that's really helpful, that sort of FE sort of framing and some of the higher education knowledge, they're not given the credit they deserve. They're not given the funding they deserve. We're obsessed by these sort of elite places like our universities, who to me are now climate change being part of the problem, not part of the solution. So I really take your point on that. I think we should be pushing very, very hard for our established academic institutions to make their doors, open their doors, and open their expertise for wider adult education.
I completely agree with that. It's something I said on the last slide that universities, like some of those exemplar colleges I mentioned, need to be involved in qualification at a below degree or vocation. That's the way they're going to get involved with the communities, particularly in the coming decades. So there needs to be a massive change.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's a couple of people. There's Terry over there, and then Janny. There's 3 more there, and maybe those will have to be the last 3 questions.
Tony, your central message, and it was the same message came from Bill and you, Kevin, was we've got to tell the truth. Everyone in this room that I can see has been involved in climate action, whether it's blocking roads, writing about it, making films about it, writing books about it. But the reality is that nothing yet has changed, and we are standing on the cusp of a Reform UK government that is in complete denial. What do we do?
Hello, Ben Horton, founder of Flood Climate. Question for Kevin. You advise caution about honours, baubles and prestige. you guys are professors, which gives you a great platform to make the strong point you're making. Could you expand on how people should be careful there?
And then Janny. Does somebody know where the lights are?
Following on from what Terry was saying, I was today down at Woolwich Crown Court supporting the Filtered 18 who are protesters against the genocide in Gaza. Now, by the way, it's on Belmarsh Road, and nearby another person of great honesty and integrity, Julian Assange, served many years in prison. Now, you know, the question I want to ask is, I mean, XR from its activists, from the very beginning, actually, one of the major demands was tell the truth. This is nothing new, you know. And for having that demand, any number of climate activists that ended up with jail sentences. At the moment, the co-founder, Roger Allen, is still serving a 5-year sentence. And, you know, this goes on, and it's very difficult to actually concentrate the minds of other people, that these people, that all of the people, activists who are really standing up and putting themselves on the line, are being punished and are being, just basically for protesting something that is blatantly obvious that we should all be involved in. So I'm just saying, let's talk a little bit about the right to protest and, how the universities also have not been great in supporting their students in doing this.
So let's take those 3 questions. Thank you, John. So, well, who does want it? So we have, as Reform UK, climb above the horizon. How should that focus our minds?
Well, as somebody who's been a lifelong Labour supporter until about 6 months ago, getting the start would be the first top of the list for me. It looks to me as if reform is growing on the back of massive disappointment in the current regime. And I can't see, first thing would be, how can we stop a reform government? That has to be a big change in politics. What we do then is somehow elect a government that walks the talk on climate breakdown. Now, how we do that, I don't know. If I knew that, I'd be pushing for it in some way. I don't know what Kevin has to say about it. It's a difficult question.
Maybe, Kevin, you'd say something about prestige.
I will, but is it okay to say something there?
Of course.
This is going to sound slightly strange, you have to hear the argument through. In some respects, I'm quite pleased that we've got Trump, and I'm quite pleased that we've got Reform, and I'm quite pleased that we've got Brexit, all of which I completely disagree with.
Yeah.
But why have large swathes of our society, who we patronisingly call the popular vote, these sort of populists and so forth, these are our friends, our colleagues, our family members who have voted for these things. Why are they voting for them? Because the progressive left hasn't been progressive left for 40 or so years. We didn't give a damn about people in the Rhondda Valley. We didn't give a damn about people in the North East or when the shipyards closed in Glasgow. The Democrats in the States didn't give a damn about people in the Dust Belt. And eventually, the people got fed up in these areas and they'll vote for anything, the orangutan or this chair, anything, rather than the establishment. And I can't blame them. And I think very significantly, the middle class, the progressive people in our society, have let those people down probably their parents and their parents' parents. Look at the Rhondda Valley. Yeah, the mines closed years ago. You look at the health statistics for there now, the education attainment for there now. They're still suffering generations later. You wander around Cambridge, as I cycled down from Derby today, and as you got towards Cambridge, you become richer and richer. It's a different world, it's a different country. As I was 30 miles from Cambridge, where am I now? It's certainly not the UK. Not the UK I recognise. It's nothing like Rochdale or Bury. It's obviously Cambridge. Same thing will be in Oxford and some parts of London as well. You know, we have not cared about them for a long time. So let's use them to kick us up the backside so that we will provide a vision that they would then aspire to. But we haven't done that. We sold fear on Brexit rather than say how useful the EU had been. Problems with it, but there are, been so much of our legislation, the legislation that's helped all these communities, has actually come out of the EU. So we need to provide a more progressive vision. And actually, it's why I quite like going back to Roosevelt. Roosevelt won 4 terms of office, which you can't do anymore in the States.
Well, we hope not.
But Roosevelt sold, during a time of depression, huge depression in the States, Roosevelt sold a vision, a progressive vision. You can go and listen to his fireside chats now, 30 or so fireside chats. They're all available to listen to. Okay, they're of their time. And remember, he was hugely influenced by his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was really deeply concerned about social issues in the States. So I think that there are really good examples of where honesty in politics, not focus group crap or fear, none of that nonsense that pervades our politics today, actual vision and honesty, it's almost soapbox politics, actually is much more appealing to these people who have voted for Trump, who have voted for reform, who have voted for Brexit. So let us create a new vision, a progressive vision, that they then might vote for. And let's not worry whether reform will be a government or not. Let's make an alternative that people can aspire to.
I'm going to pass it to you in a sec, but I'm aware of the time, and we're really going to end by 1:45, because we said we'd end at past. So you can say something, then I'm going to say something.
I just wanted to point out, in terms of that progressive vision, that we had that in 2017. It's now been airbrushed out of Labour Party history, along with Jeremy Corbyn himself, pretty much.
And it's also just worth noting that Corbyn got about 3 million more votes than Starmer. And yet the journalists keep calling it a landslide for Starmer. It wasn't a landslide, it's whoever first past the post system. 3 million more votes.
You've got honest media as well.
The biggest increase in Labour voters of all, in fact.
Okay. Sue, you're trying to tell me something?
Just can we take, there were 3 more hands up. Can you, if the questions are really short?
Well, can you keep your questions really short? I don't want people to disappear until I've told you that there's another event on Thursday here. 6:30, but 6:30 with Michael Copley, a virtuoso flautist, accompanied on a piano. From 6:30 to 7, there'll be something to eat, and then we're going to talk. We're going to sit round in a big circle, and we're going to listen to people who are concerned about the contribution, the responsibility of Cambridge University towards the citizens of Cambridge. Some things that we've been talking about will be continued from tonight, but I hope everybody will come back on Thursday. Now, happy to listen to the... Oh, and there's another event. Hold on, I'm going to tell you another one just before that. On Wednesday at 2 p.m. in the Union Building, myself and another of the Chancellor candidates, we've decided we kind of agree about most things. So we're going to have a chat in the Union Building about how the Chancellorship, and for that mean the culture of Cambridge University, could be different. Okay, now we'll take the 3 questions.
Yeah. Prestige. Then not prestige. Gold awards.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You can still ask your question quickly.
It's more about what will be your favourite audience. You've got 50 people who know what to do. Who are the 50 people who talk to who don't know what to do? And you might have a lot of doors, but who do you want to speak to?
Okay, thanks Ian. Great to see you almost. I can almost see you.
Another very quick one, Andrew Danes, engineer and Just Stop Oil campaigner. Your share prices of UK and Norwegian oil companies went up about 20% a few weeks ago when the government announced that they've got a framework in place to try and get around the Supreme Court and Court of Sessions ruling on tertiary emissions and cancellation of Rosebank licence. So it's looking like they might get re-licensed. Any suggestions for actions, disruptive or otherwise, that might have any conceivable impact on this happening?
My question is probably more of a statement. The reason that you find institutions and anything else that they don't seem to want to do anything for climate is because it's not profitable for them to do so. And there's no accountability for them to do so because it just goes around and around in the system. Now, we had King's College obviously divest, which I mentioned obviously last week, and their basis for divestment was that they had to divest in order to protect themselves as a charity. So it would not be cost effective for them not to do so. So why do we not do that and flip it on its head for other institutions and other perspectives to start to say, you are not complying with your charity objectives, you are not complying with what it is that you are doing, and for doing so you're going to lose your tax breaks and therefore it's going to be much more expensive. Start holding them to account.
Good one.
You never get to ask your question. Who's that? It's the judges, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's the prestige one. Yeah. Now I got it. I got it. Yeah. Sorry. Carry on.
Okay. On the prestige one.
But we have to be quite quick.
Okay. As you say, professors can have their voices heard. Actually, I think we often hear from them too much. I think we know from lots and lots of good social science research that the people you trust most are those people that are around you with a similar accent that talk about things that you're familiar with. So it's fine always to have weird things. They work for some people, but they are not necessarily the greatest form of engagement with the public. And by and large, academics are pretty crap communicators. So I think we need a much wider cohort of people who will take messages out and adjust them accordingly how they see fit. And hopefully that way we can get a process of trust in the storylines, the narrative that we need to have. And there should be a very plural set of narratives. There shouldn't just be one that Bill and I and Tony might like. They'll be much richer than that. But on the prestige thing particularly, I'm trying to not name the names. The academics that I know that have ended up with some gong or the other, I should say, I don't like gongs anyway, because they're always there. The minimum gong is handed out to the dinner man or the lollipop lady or whatever it happens to be, and then the fancy gongs are handed out to some theatre director or academic or some other great who's already paid a fortune anyway. So I don't particularly like how we actually again use gongs to increase inequality in our society, but also that those gongs themselves tend to mean that it's the establishment that gives them. So by and large, and this seems to be the case with the academics I know that have got them on climate change, that they don't speak out. And there's an appeal, this allure of being taken up by the CEOs, by the ministers, by having himself knighted. Jim Ski, the head of the IPCC, got his knighthood, and yet he still said you needed 7% per annum reductions to meet 1.5, when the IPCC analysis says you need 20% reductions. So, we generally, I think the problem with gongs, they help us spin a yarn that fits with the establishment. I don't like gongs anyway, but there is a real concern there for me about this prestige. And I think it's a huge underestimated influence in our society, is this prestige. And we all fall foul of it. I fall foul of it just like everyone else does. So we have to almost collectively fight against it and help our friends see, and our colleagues see it when it's actually affecting them, and they have to do it when it's affecting us. But I think it is very important.
Something that Kevin mentioned there really leads into another issue, which is scientists saying in public what they say in private. I know so many climate scientists, people working in the field, again, I don't want to name names, but many of them just say something completely different when you're in conversation. They are totally pessimistic. They think we're fucked, effectively. But they will never say that in public. People working for the Met Office, for example, others in other institutions that are either government related or somewhere along that line, they should be speaking out. There should be no difference about what they say public and what they say private. And tell the truth is the thing that's been mentioned a number of times today, and that is critical.
Okay, I know. I just want to come back to your point, Jenny, about protest. When people are making changes about things that are incredibly important for ourselves and others around the world, well, protest is what we do. And if it involves non-violent, direct action, that's what many of us do. We're going to have to come to a close. I can see a hand sort of waving there. Okay. No. Take the mic. But it's great that you want to say something. But can you be brief, please?
It's a very quick request. Please can everybody write to their MPs tonight to ask them to oppose the welfare reform bill, which is basically instrument of persecuting people living with disabilities and illnesses.
Okay. Are you
just not on that particular point, but following that point and responding to the thing, what could we do?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think I work in Sweden quite a lot, and I was at an event there with about 300 people, and they said, "What do you think you can do?" And I said, "Well, imagine if you got together and you could always write one letter every year to your minister and your MP, and if you all did this, you only have to write one letter. Your minister or MP would have a letter every single day, telling them about how important climate change." I think bad things happen, not because of Farage and Trump. Bad things happen because good people stay quiet. And most of the world are good people. And so I think there is something about us to have our voices heard. So engage in write to the university, to the Vice Chancellor, and whoever people are on the committee that design these sort of things. Write to them. And you think, get together with a group of you, and they could have a letter every day that's turning up for them. The same with the writing to our MPs. Our MPs want our votes. There are multiple ways we can engage now. So we can write to them, we can email them, we can use social media, but we can then also put that into the local press as well. So there are lots of ways that we as individuals can engage, and hopefully by doing that, then we stimulate other people to engage in these debates. And they may have different views to us, but at least they're engaged in the debate.
We're going to have to. How quick?
I was just going to say that, talking in terms of your suggestion for getting things done, I've got a different plan. My 21-year-old is Chief of Staff for Derbyshire Dales Labour MP, who is now on the Environmental Audit Committee. So I feed my son stuff, he feeds his MP, and it gets into the Environmental Audit Committee. That's another way of doing things.
That's good. Okay, great. Look, there are people who I love very, very dearly, to whom I refuse to say, we're effed, we're fucked. I refuse. The reason I'm standing as Chancellor is because I refuse, even though I know the reality, and I stare at it very clearly, I refuse to say, there's no hope. So, and I think that we're here tonight. We don't travel down, cycling 100 miles to Derby because you don't think there's things that we can do. And I think the same for you, Bill. You've both travelled a long way. You both gave brilliantly honest contributions. I appreciate them hugely myself, but I'd like everyone else to show their appreciation. Thank you.